Welcome to the AI Brief from the YPO Technology Network. I'm Stephen Forte. Mostly this week, we have been circling a single question, who controls AI? And today, we got three answers, and not one of them is the market. Three of them, in fact, SpaceX buying the coding tool your engineers live in for $60 billion, China funding a frontier AI champion built so no outside investor ever touches the wheel, and the United States government arguing that one company's gas turbines are a national security matter worth overriding pollution law to protect. All week, the question kept coming back. Monday, it was hidden guardrails. Tuesday, it was Washington restricting who may even use American models. Wednesday, it was France ripping out U.S. software and a wave of money chasing the people who govern AI agents. Today, the answer arrives in its bluntest form yet. Control is concentrating into a private empire, into a national champion, and into the hand of the state itself. Let us take them in order. Story 1. On Monday, June 16th, 4 days after SpaceX completed the largest initial public offering in history, SpaceX agreed to buy Anysphere, the company behind the AI coding tool Cursor, in a $60 billion all-stock deal. All stock means no cash changed hands. SpaceX paid in its own shares. It was exercising an option struck back in April, so this was less a courtship than a prearranged marriage. Here is the context that makes the number make sense. Earlier this year, SpaceX merged with xAI, that is Elon Musk's artificial intelligence lab, the one that builds the Grok chatbot and runs a supercomputer cluster called Colossus. The combined entity is valued around $250 billion. So this purchase does not just add a product, it folds a leading coding tool into the same house as the models and the machines that train them. Cursor is one of the fastest growing software products ever built. Reportedly around $2 billion in annual recurring revenue, that is ARR, the subscription money a software company can count on every year. What Cursor does is agentic coding. An agentic coding tool writes and edits software semi-autonomously. You describe what you want, and it drafts fixes and ships large chunks of the code itself. xAI did not have one of those in-house. Now it does. The terms tell you how serious everyone is. All stock expected to close in the third quarter pending regulatory approval with a reported $10 billion breakup fee. The penalty, one side pays the other. If the deal collapses, $10 billion to walk away. That is not a hedge. That is a company nailing the door shut. Here is my read. This is the most expensive bet anyone has ever placed, that the developer's coding environment, the tool engineers sit inside all day, every day, is strategic territory, not a feature you buy off a shelf. Musk is vertically integrating the entire stack, the chips, the model, and now the surface where the work actually happens. He owns the factory, the engine, and the steering wheel. If your engineers run on Cursor, that core tool now lives inside SpaceX and xAI. Treat it the way you would treat a critical supplier getting acquired by a competitor, because functionally, that is what happened. I would ask one question out loud this quarter. What is our exposure if the terms, the pricing, or the politics of this tool change under new ownership, and what is our second source? Not a panic, a continuity question, the kind you already ask about your logistics carrier, and your payroll provider. Now to story 2, which is the same question wearing a flag instead of a personality. The Chinese AI lab DeepSeek closed its first ever external funding round this week, more than $7.4 billion at a valuation north of $50 billion. That makes it China's most valuable AI startup. The numbers were reported by the Wall Street Journal and The Information, but the money is not the story. The structure is. The round is built mostly on domestic Chinese capital, and it was deliberately engineered to preserve founder Liang Wenfeng's full control. No outside investor gets the wheel. They get to ride. They do not get to steer. Set that against the week we have just had. Washington is restricting who may use American models. Paris is tearing American software out of its government systems. And Beijing, in the same stretch of days, is funding a fully independent, homegrown frontier champion at superpower scale and structuring it so that control never leaves the founder's hands or the country's borders. A DeepSeek priced above $50 billion on home capital is sovereignty expressed as a cap table. China is not buying a seat at the AI table. It is building its own table in its own building with the locks changed. For those of you running multinationals, the practical consequence is simple. A credible non-US frontier model now exists, real, funded, independent. That is genuinely useful. Give them credit because building a frontier lab without leaning on American capital or American chips is a hard thing. And they did it. But choosing it brings the whole geopolitical package with it. Procurement scrutiny, data governance questions about where your information sits and who can reach it, and the reality that your model vendor is now an instrument of a national strategy. Notice the mirror between these two stories. One is a private empire concentrating control under a single man. The other is a nation concentrating control under a single flag. Different owners, same direction of travel, which brings us to story 3, where the concentrating party is the government itself. This week, the U.S. Department of Justice intervened in a lawsuit to argue that XAI should be allowed to keep running more than 57 unpermitted gas turbines powering its Colossus data center near Memphis. The NAACP, the civil rights organization, had sued under the Clean Air Act, the federal law that limits industrial air pollution, over the smog those turbines produce in a neighborhood that did not consent to a power plant. The government's argument is the remarkable part. Shutting the turbines off, the DOJ said, would threaten national economic and energy security because Grok supports U.S. Department of War operations, including, per the filing, recent strikes in Iran. Environmental groups, including Earth Justice and the Southern Environmental Law Center, both legal nonprofits that litigate pollution cases, call it a naked power grab to exempt a politically favored company from a law everyone else has to follow. The sprinklers, in this case, are the Clean Air Act. They tried, they lost. Step back from the turbines and you see the real pattern. By one count, there are at least 57 off-grid power plants, meaning plants that bypass the public electricity grid entirely, proposed or under construction in the U.S. purely to feed AI data centers. Bypassing the grid means bypassing the public oversight that comes with it. And at the Viva Tech conference in Paris this week, Europe's largest technology event, Schneider Electric projected that AI's share of data center power consumption will climb from roughly 8% toward as much as 20% by 2028. Here's what is actually happening. The federal government just classified one company's AI compute as critical national infrastructure, important enough to override environmental law to keep it running. That is an extraordinary marker. It tells you in legal language exactly how strategic AI energy has become. And the durable lesson for every executive in this audience has nothing to do with Memphis. It is this: power, not chips, is now the gating constraint on AI scale. The politics of who gets to build a data center and who gets to energize it just turned openly combative, with the Justice Department on one side and the Clean Air Act on the other. If your AI roadmap quietly assumes cheap, abundant, uncontested electricity, I would revisit that assumption before the end of the quarter. The companies that win the next 2 years will not be the ones with the cleverest models. They will be the ones who secured the power to run them. Pull the three together, and the week resolves into one sentence. We kept asking, who controls AI? The answer came back as concentration, a private empire, a national champion, and a government willing to set aside its own law to keep the servers humming. Yes, 2 of those stories share a protagonist. That is the era, not the editor. So here is the question to carry into your next leadership meeting. How many of your critical AI dependencies trace back to a single owner, a single country, or a single political decision? Map that exposure honestly. Then ask where your second source is for each one. The model will commoditize, the control will not. That is the YPO Technology Network AI Brief for Thursday, June 18th. I am Stephen Forte. If this was useful, send it to another member. I will be back tomorrow with more. Until then, stay sharp.